are, how far we've come, or how far we believe we've come, and what's really going on.
Well, your second statement was more accurate. How far we believe we have come. Now,
right.
Here's the question. Where are we getting the belief that we've made so much progress? Now, the interesting thing about progress, like any other abstract concept, freedom, equality, is that these types of abstract social constructs are defined differently by different people. For example, when we take progress, when people say black people cannot deny that they have made progress, well, you have to define what do you mean by that. Now, most black people, regardless of where you live globally, because white supremacy has created a black aristocracy everywhere in the world. So whether you live in Africa, whether you live in Canada, the States, London, the Caribbean, Central South America, there's a buffer group of Negroes that the European social order where you live have created to give you the illusion of that inclusion. In other words, you have a group of black academicians, religious leaders or pastors, black people who are economically elite, black people who are in the communications industry, movies, magazines, music, etc., and then black people who occupy positions of authority, chiefs of police, politicians, CEOs of European organizations, so forth. It is this educated buffer group that is actually used to explain away to the rest of us or to make us believe that we actually come further along than we have. Now, granted, there is something to be said about the fact that we no longer wear the physical barriers of oppression, such as chains, slave papers, those kinds of things. But if you look closely at the various social and political challenges that black people face, if you look beyond the chains of slavery, you will see that those chains still exist, but in invisible form now. So it's not that slavery ended, but that it was transformed into a system that makes it hard for you to tell that it is still there. For example, if you look at the incarceration rate of black people in the Caribbean, in Africa, in London, in the States, in Canada, there's more black people incarcerated in many of the countries where we live than there were during the time of slavery. So if you say that slavery is over, but you have more black people in jail today than you had in slavery, is it really over? And then people will make the question or beg the argument, well, even though you have people in jail, they will get out of jail. So isn't that somehow different from slavery? Because enslavement was perpetual. It was until you died. Well, I would argue, as someone who works in prisons, that incarceration is also perpetual. Because if you go to jail for selling drugs or stealing cars or whatever the case may be, and most recently we hear that our great musician, Lauryn Hill, is now possibly facing prison time for tax evasion. Once you get a felony on your record, even though you're released from jail, you're still a prisoner because you're not going to be able to get medical assistance. You don't qualify for public welfare. You don't get free housing. You don't qualify for financial aid for college. So even though you've only been to jail for a couple of years, by virtue of having gone there and by virtue of having received that felony, you are actually incarcerated for life. And so that's why I call the illusion of inclusion white supremacy new clothing, because it has new clothing. And one of the biggest confusionary tactics that are being used now, that is being used to really make us think we've come a long way, is the election election of President Barack Obama. Now, the interesting thing about Obama's presidency is that it has not reaped any measurable progress for black people whatsoever. President Obama has done more for people who practice alternative sexual lifestyles. He's done more for immigrants, or illegal immigrants rather. He's done more for all other constituencies of color than he has for African people. In fact, he's done nothing for African people. Now, we do understand, obviously, that the President of the United States must look out for all of the American people, not just black people. I get that. I understand that. I agree with that. There would be nothing more ridiculous than for a president to stand up and say, I'm only going to look out for people who look like me. But the interesting thing, Mrs. Blue, is that all previous 43 presidents have done just that. They have looked out exclusively for their own race, but they didn't say it. They just did it. So it's not that we need President Obama to make any declarations about his blackness. We don't need him to make any declarations about what he needs to do for black people. What we need him to do is to do it. The other point I want to make about Obama's negligence of African people globally is the fact that America is not a monolithic group of people. There's no such thing really as an American people. The American people are a conglomerate of various nations, cultures, races, and constituencies. I think we would all agree that most Americans are not homosexual or lesbian, but President Obama has taken care of the homosexual and lesbian agenda. I think we would agree that not all Americans are Hispanic, but President Obama has taken care of the Hispanic constituency. We would agree that not all Americans are illegal immigrants, but President Obama is doing a lot to give illegal immigrants the opportunity to come to America and take jobs, homes, and education from black people who actually built this country. So if you look at what he's done so far, he has taken care of specific constituencies, because that's what America is. It is a solid bowl. You don't take care of American people. You take care of the workers. You take care of the rich. You take care of the females. You take care of the elders. You take care of the youth. You take care of the Anglo-Saxon. You take care of the African-American, the Hispanic-American, the Asian. So America is not monolithic. So when you say that he has to be president of all American people, does that not include us? Are we not part of the fabric of America? In fact, African people can make the argument that we are more American than anyone else living in this country because we built it. And not only did we build it, we were here longer than almost anyone else who's here. Most people fail to recognize that the African was in America longer than the European himself, and definitely longer than all other cultural nationalities. So we have to look at the definition of progress that's being fed to us. And the last thing I'll say is this.